That way, it always counts when I put in some effort. Well, I guess it. Well, I guess it.
All right, so there's been a weird uh, audio glitch happening, and I'm not sure if I fixed it or not. So I think we're okay. I'm not seeing it pop up on the mixer, so I think I'm all right. I'm going to be reading chapter 6. It's a little longer. I'll hopefully get through it within the next hour. And there's a possibility I'll delay Wednesday's reading maybe until Thursday, just because my wife and I are heading to an event. So it may not be something that I can do Wednesday. I also know that I haven't put the files up on YouTube yet, and that's just because I haven't had a chance to download and re-upload them to YouTube. But I'm going to do that right after I do this. I had an issue with the file for one of the chapters didn't download properly, and I didn't want to upload them out of order. So I'm going to fix that as soon as I'm done here. So, quick recap. A second storyline has begun in the series. We have met Edge and Raymir. Edge is a lieutenant of Wolfbane, who is sort of the big bad figure that has led this invasion of the Northlands and conquered the Napoleon Empire for Narath, the god of death. Edge was his adopted son, a lost elf, means he has eyes that are entirely green, white hair, and lives to be quite old, although he's not necessarily old himself. Uh, Edge was working for Wolfbane, then decided he didn't like the direction things were going in, and so he fled. He tried to take Wolfbane with him in the last chapter and was interrupted by the undead wizard De'Arvaron, who figured out what Edge was up to and tried to catch him, and also insinuated he was going to have Raymir, Edge's sort of girlfriend, sort of acquaintance, murdered. Edge got back to Raymir's cottage, where she had an escape tunnel. They escaped through the tunnel, but the servant who was with them, who had brought supplies for Edge to get out, betrayed them. And the last scene was of a dagger being brought down on Edge's head as Raymir was watching. That was the cliffhanger from Friday. For today, you will actually be going back to Trem and Joven in the Inn of the Four Winds in Gailakill, where they just watched a performer, a illusionist, do a fairly substantial show and then be threatened by a drunk who the performer's assistant, a large anthropomorphic cat, scared off. And Joven was concerned about the drunk, and Trem's response was, "Don't worry about him. The real danger is the boy. He's an actual mage." And Trem knew that because his skin is affected, gets a tingling sensation when magic is in the air, and he felt it when the performer did his last trick, so he knows there's something serious going on there. So that will be where we pick up for 6, with Joven and Trem having their conversation in the inn. Joven stared at Trem for a moment as if considering whether or not he was serious. A mage, you mean a real one? Trem nodded as Jovanileth leaned back to get another look at the young performer. No, he can't be. He's far too young to have completed his training. He'd still be an Osmandius at that age. The matronly cook dropped 2 bowls of stew before them along with a pair of mugs. Trem tossed her some coins and reached for his ale. Taking a long sip, he turned to face his friend with a small smile. It's been some time since I had a real drink. Now to your point. I agree, but the fact remains he's still a wizard. Joven started to protest, but Trem silenced him with a wave of his hand. Oh, he had a couple of common street acts, like you said, but that last one, nobody performs a trick like that with only sleight of hand. That was a mage's illusion, through and through. I can sense these things. Joven gave his stew a gingerly slurp before responding. Sense? What do you mean? Trem looked at him with a puzzled expression. You should understand. His eyes drifted to Joven's ears, which had visible but not excessive points. Your blood and mine, it's of the same ancestry. Joven reached up to touch his ear points and smiled slightly. You mean half-elven? But you have more elf in you than I do, Trem, and I am some years beyond my Nevalan. What few elven gifts I once had have faded in the past years. Trem took a bite from a large chunk of meat in the stew and said around his mouthful, Yet you do not remember the tingling of your blood around a wizard as they invoked the arcane word? Ah, Joven nodded. I do recall hearing of that with some half-elves, but it was very rare and took a great deal of magic for most to experience. You're saying your elven blood can feel the presence of magic? Oftentimes, yes, but it is not true for all elves. I hear those of Silverleaf are far less likely to feel its presence, but I can, and when that boy unveiled his last trick, I felt the sensation strongly. He's a real mage, Jovanileth, most assuredly. But then how was he out here? He can't be more than 20 years at best, and Osmandius keeps most of their charges a decade longer than that, sometimes more. Trem took another sip of ale. Sometimes those who practice arcane magic do not stay in Osmandius, dangerous as the alternatives can be. Joven looked at him a moment longer and was about to question him further when the man sitting to Trem's left leaned in and whispered, Your friend is correct, boy. That was no mean flight of fancy. He pulled the wool over everyone's eyes with his other tricks first, but that last feat, well, take it from one who knows, that was real magic. Joven and Trem both turned to study the speaker, who smiled at their sudden attentiveness. He had long black hair graying through his temples and most of his forehead, along with a very gray beard surrounding his face and short curls of bushy hair. His smile was slight and gave away nothing, but his eyes were hard as rock and gray to match. He wore muddied and battered plate armor and a heavy white cloak, which must have once been very expensive, but was so travel-worn and dirty that only a beggar would be interested in it now. Trem mostly noticed the battered and curved scimitar at his side. It had a ruby-jeweled handle and looked to be worth more than the whole inn put together. When the man noticed him looking, he swiftly swirled his cloak to cover it. His smile broadened unconvincingly. You have the look of a well-traveled man, though perhaps not so worn as myself. He laughed, a gruff but nevertheless amiable sound. Where have you come from? Joven returned his smile, though more freely. We came from the south, through Silverleaf Forest. The man's eyes widened, and he took another look at them, this one more considering than before. Well, now, you certainly must have some ability with those weapons to make it out of those woods. Folks around here tell me they are haunted. He took a swig from his own mug and looked at them as though he expected a heroic tale of how they valiantly fought their way clear after days of travel without rest. Trem disappointed him quickly. You're truly not a local. The woods are about as haunted as this inn, from what we saw. I used to live there, and I never saw a single spirit. The man sighed and took another gulp from his cup. Too bad. I was hoping for a rousing adventurer's tale. You two had the look, despite being a bit young. Me? I hail from the north. Been in too many scrapes to remember every one. Might as well try remembering every stone I see on the road. Joven was intrigued. You're from the north. I fear I must ask you a question of dire importance. Did you ever meet a man from the city of Bladehelm? He'd be about your age, maybe older, might have carried a worn sword like my own. The man was already shaking his head before Joven finished. Sorry, lad, have not heard of him. Is that what you're off to, heading north on a mission to find this man? I suggest you think again. The north isn't safe for no one nowadays. There are things up there worse than broken or knolls. It took me many weeks just to get clear, and even now I'm far from safe. He paused as though he suddenly thought he had said too much and grunted into his mug, taking another swallow. Then again, it's your skin, not mine, so do what you will. I just hope this comrade of yours is worth looking for. Joven eyed him hard. He's my father. I've not seen him in months and intend to bring him home, alive. The man changed his tune rapidly. Ah, sorry, boy. I didn't know. Look, if it's that important to you, then I think I can help you, but I would need your help first. I have a package I need to retrieve. It's only a few weeks south of the woods, but I would be in need of guides, and I cannot find anyone willing to travel that far. You bring me through, and we get what I seek. I'll take you north, and if your father's there, friend, we will find him. I know the north better than any man. What do you say? Before Joven could respond, Trem jumped in, saying, You'll have to pardon us, sir, but I think we ought to discuss this privately before we give you our decision. I hope that won't inconvenience you too much." The man smiled that non-smile again and stuck out his hand. "Fair enough. I have to get a room anyway, so you just talk it over until I get back." Trem grasped his extended hand, and the man gave him a rather rough handshake. "Call me Ghost. Just Ghost if you have to ask after me. I'll tell the innkeeper to show you my room if you need me in a hurry." Trem returned the shake just as fiercely, never letting his gaze slip from the man's eyes. "Very well, Ghost. My name's Trem, and this is Jovaneleth. Well met, then. Whether we work together or not, speak with you both later." And with that and a rather promising wink, Ghost hopped from his stool and was gone in the crowd. Jovan looked at Trem accusingly. "Why did you act so coldly to him? I questioned the innkeeper before you got here, and she knew nothing. That man may be the only person who can help us." "He may also be just the person to slit our throats if we're not careful," Trem responded angrily. "You can't trust every man you meet in an inn. We have to be certain of his intentions." "I apologize. You're right," Jovan said, recognizing the wisdom of Trem's words. "He may not be safe for traveling with, but I think he told the truth about being from the north and knowing it well." Trem nodded his agreement and took up another bite of stew. "Yes, I'd say he's a northerner, and that is why he could be dangerous. The north is a treacherous place, even to those who live there. I would also like to know what package we're supposed to help him get. From the tone of his voice, it didn't sound like something he wanted other people to know about. But he could be part of the Napoleon resistance. There's still a few trying to fight the invaders up north. And if he is, I say we help him. My home could be next on their list, and with no word from Angladeus since the invasion, who knows what may have happened to them. Without their paladins and armies, the rest of Lagosha is in grave peril. No other country is large or powerful enough to stand against this invasion if the rumors are true. If all the nations united, that might be enough to drive out the invaders." Jovan laughed mirthlessly. "They'll never unite. The Eagle Knights turned down my father, once one of their own. There are too many differences going back far too many years, and not a single common bond to hold us together. Once the invaders are knocking on their doors, they may realize their foolishness, but it'll be too late." Trem sat pondering the situation. Like Jovaneleth, he could not believe the invaders would be satisfied with just the wintry Northlands. Once they got beyond the Dragonscale Mountains, they would be in the rich farmlands of Dragon's Watch, and the broken tribes would become the least of the free people's worries. Trem wondered briefly again if he'd made the wrong choice, but he pushed such dark thoughts aside. "Eat your food," Trem said, "or else it will get cold. Give me time to come up with a plan. Maybe we'll be leaving with this man Ghost after all. Just let me handle the negotiations." Jovan took a bite and smiled contentedly. "All right, Trem, I can follow your lead." "Good." Trem stirred his spoon thoughtfully. "I don't doubt your good sense, Jovaneleth. I have just seen enough of the world to know that most people have a darker side than they present. I understand that you seem a bit more on edge than you were earlier." The man from Blaetome researched his companion's face for some sign of confirmation of his suspicions. Trem met Jovan's eyes and shook his head in confusion. "I can't explain it, but since we met Ghost, I have had a chill running down my spine." Trem gazed over his shoulder out the window and into the night. "Something's coming, Jovaneleth. Be sure your sword is loose in the sheath." With that night having come rapidly on, as it did near the end of the fall, the guards at the gates of Guayaquil had to deal with the rapid loss of their line of sight over the plains. Typically, the open, flat spaces allowed them a chance to spot any incoming travelers to the small town, or to see broken attack party on its way in time to seal up the walls and raise the alarm. When night fell, the guards became more alert, for broken raids were not unheard of, and with the reports coming from the east that the guardsmen were all on shorter nerves than usual, the two men stationed at the northern gate had a more relaxed attitude this night. All sightings of broken troops came from the east, after all, and there was rarely a traveler coming from the north. Very few Napoleons had escaped farther than the Wind Pass, or the southern foothills of the God's Bones Mountains. Bode and Welland were two of the youngest guards, recently appointed because they were young and fit, if a bit rambunctious at times. Being friends and new to the job, they had been assigned the northern gate in the hopes it would offer them little enough time to get in trouble. But as the saying goes, mischief loves idle hands, and these two were no exception. Without much chance of a visitor and having received the night shift, they had opted to smuggle some of the Inn of the Four Winds famous autumn ale out the back earlier that afternoon. With their own beat-up tin cups in hand, they had tapped the small barrel minutes after the sun disappeared, and now an hour later, they were deep into it and it into them. Talk had ranged from the prettiest girls just up for marriage to the possibility of fighting Broken, something both looked forward to with the foolish eagerness of youth. After all, the Broken may once have been well-trained soldiers in the army of the Lion, but they had deteriorated in the 30-odd years since the legendary siege to a ragtag horde that won battles by the sheer weight of their numbers. At least that was the common opinion. It's therefore not surprising they would never notice the 5 riders that seemed to materialize out of the gloom just a bare 3 yards in front of them. Even if they had not been deep in the innkeeper's best brew, it's likely they would have noted these particular 5. More annoyed than alarmed by this sudden appearance, Bode and Welland rose unsteadily to their feet in surprise, but determined to follow their orders. Being intoxicated as much with their own heroic chatter as with the ale, they made a brave show of it, If they had been more themselves, they might have noticed the exceedingly emaciated appearance of the 5 steeds, and perhaps the cold emanating from the dark, foreboding cloaks and hoods of the riders. They did not, however, and with encouraging cries from Bode, Welland rashly threatened them with his spear, ordering them to camp a mile outside the walls and wait until morning like everyone else. When the lead rider made no reply and his colleagues showed no intent of turning around and doing as ordered, a rather unsure Welland daringly pressed forward to pursue their departure further. Neither saw the black blade sliding out of its scabbard until it was too late, although Bode immediately turned to rally the guards once he saw Welland's head neatly sliced from his body with nary a sound. Unfortunately, he never got the chance to cry out. One of the back riders shot him in the shoulder with a heavy black shaft, and its poison turned his cry into a foaming, sputtering gasp. The leader sheathed his sword, and his companion replaced his bow. Riding up to the gate, the first rider waved his hand before it, and the heavy slide bolt splintered and snapped. The door swung wide with a small creak that the tower archers did not respond to until the mysterious riders had trotted silently into town. No one was left on the main road to see them. No begging was taking place once night fell, as the refugees had retired to the smaller street alleys, huddled masses near the towers, and a few fortunate ones to the homes of kindly folk. Nobody saw the 5 black figures ride slowly through town, turn to the west, and head for the inn. Break. Trem and Joven were enjoying their meal, each one lost in his own thoughts when the inn door was hurled open. Most of the people in the building looked up, though a small hum of conversation and raucous laughter continued, but not for long. Gradually, the entire inn turned and stared at the figure in the doorway. Despite himself, Trem stared too, for he'd never seen a larger orc in his life. Joven's hand was gripping his broadsword hilt in a white-knuckled fashion, and he was not the only patron who looked ready to fight, though more were prepared to run out the back door. The orc was wearing a large wolfskin kilt that hung past his knees, and a heavy half-moon axe was glinting from over his left shoulder where it rode easily strapped to his back. 2 crossbelts were strung tightly over his unclothed chest, both containing a vast assortment of throwing knives and axes. This all would have been extraordinary for any adventurer, even if he were not also clearly a purebred orc. Dark green skin and sharp, almost elven ears marked him out clearly. The ears are the only characteristic orcs shared with the elves, for the rest of their appearance was fearsome and bestial. This particular specimen's lower protruding fang teeth had been sawed down and blunted over a clean-cut and massive chin. He wore his hair down to his waist, braided in several lengths, then tied with orange cuts of cloth. Despite his fierce appearance, Trem noted he was well-groomed and civilized-looking, unnatural for the tribal, minimalist living conditions preferred by most orcs. Most remarkable, he had a large tattoo over his heart of a bird of prey taking flight, a symbol Trem did not associate with any known orcish clan. The large beast turned to address another figure standing behind him, hidden by the tall and broad creature. "Aye, Logan, this do be a good-looking establishment." And with that, he stepped aside, nodding respectfully to the inn's guests, and allowed the obstructed figure to enter. The man behind him was also unmistakable, but not in the same way as his strange partner. He wore shining plate mail, expertly designed to allow plenty of free movement along with unparalleled protection. Trem had seen the same make only once before, but he knew it instantly. The beautifully worked carvings of his armor shone bronze even in the moderately well-lit inn. The same bird which Trem now recognized as a hawk was clearly represented in the center of the chest plate. Trem realized then that it was an Angledaic High Lord's family marking. Trem guessed the suit of mail was an inherited one, based on the impressive intricacy of the armored design. Joven leaned over and whispered into his ear, "The orc has the same symbol on that man's breastplate tattooed to his chest." Trem glanced briefly back to the orc and nodded. "I noticed. Certainly an unusual pair." Trem knew the marking meant that, for whatever reason, the orc was also a member of the same Angledaic house. He would not be a knight. Only humans were permitted to pursue a paladin rank in the Angledaic regime, and knighthood was the first of many exclusive steps. The man had dark brown hair cut short and precisely, with a rough, unshaven face excepting a tuft of hair on his chin. He looked worn and haggard from travel, but was also youthful, perhaps in his late 20s. His clear blue eyes were depthless, though, and spoke of years of more experience, and Trem would have bet confidently on his ability to use the fine sword at his side. The very presence of these two outside their famed kingdom was unusual, and despite his preference for keeping out of such matters, Trem was curious as to why they were so far from home. The knight bowed to the overweight matron as she approached, and announced just loudly enough for all to hear, "I am Logan Angledaeus, of the Hawking House of Angledaeus, son of Arvadas Angledaeus, current blessed ruler of that kingdom, and Paladinus' hand on the mortal plane. My companion is Grimtooth Angledaeus, also of Hawking House, and my blood brother. We seek a meal and a night's rest here if you are able to house us. We can pay you good coin." All but the last was spoken with an air of tiresome chore, although Logan's voice did sound with pride when he announced Grimtooth as his blood brother, as though daring anyone to challenge the claim. No one did. Such an announcement was startling not just because of the unusual tradition, blood brothers being an orcish creation, but because of the mere existence of Grimtooth. The orcs had been a race in great decline for several decades, perhaps longer. It was difficult to determine the inner workings of their society as they lived in secluded holds in the mountains around the Dust Plains. As far as Trem knew, only the Ice Moon clan was still active, but even they were rarely seen outside their hold. His knowledge of their race was limited, but he doubted very much that this orc had grown up in the traditional surroundings of his kind. The fact that Logan was Grimtooth's blood brother was arguably the most astounding portion of his pronouncement. Orcs used religious rites of blood to bond with those of their clan and form tighter, more familial relationships within it. Many tests and trials had to be passed, oaths had to be taken, and pain endured. It was said the exhausting ceremony lasted for as many as 5 days, during which little sleep and no nourishment were permitted to the two striving to become brethren. The idea that these two had gone through such a trial was what most fascinated Trem. He understood such mergings of bloodlines to be rare, and he had never heard of such a union between an orc and someone not of their clans. What Trem knew of the Angladaic people was more than he did of orcs, but still limited, for even during his wandering years, he had never ventured there. The kingdom was in a region called Cloud Peak Basin, sheltered on its western and southern ends by the most dense and dangerous section of Silverleaf Forest, a nest of thick branches and tangled vines that was impassable in most places. This provided a barrier impenetrable to all but the most intrepid adventurers, and no army would ever pass through it swiftly or safely enough to threaten any kingdom. On its eastern end were expansive cliffs that towered hundreds of feet over the rushing, roaring waters of the Longwater, the fabled sea that had no end. The only passable entrance to Angladeus was between the Pillars of Light, two massive stone spires of harsh brown rock. Easily 30 miles in diameter, they rose at an almost perpendicular angle from the earth, their tips invisible in the sheltering clouds. The western peak began at the edge of Silverleaf Forest, and its twin along the cliffs that brushed against the Longwater. The space between them was wide enough only for 3 horsemen to ride abreast, and not comfortably. The long, narrow pass could easily be defended against any invader. The geography of the kingdom would have made it a legend in its own. But the society itself was the real magnificence of Angladeus. The greatest city in all Lagotia, Alderlast, built like a great 8-spoked wheel with glistening stone walls and towering pearl-white buildings, held the greatest concentration of the kingdom's people. There were other lesser cities and many citizens who farmed the rich lands of the basin. Rumors claimed that in Angladeus no one was permitted to go hungry, crime was swiftly and brutally punished, and the rulers were wise and caring. But the inner workings of the High Lord houses were far less noble. Violent competition and merciless attempts to overthrow and eliminate rival houses were day-to-day occurrences. Kept quietly hidden from the public eye, these secret battles of politics are waged constantly among the many minor nobility and the greater High Lord houses. The reason stability still existed in the land at all was that the ruling house of Angladeus fell to the High Lord who had the support of the people. The Hawking House had maintained hold on the throne for over 400 years, despite repeated attempts from other High Lords to seize it. The High Lords were all supposed descendants of the first men ever to settle Lagotia. Only they and their children could rise to the position of king. Among their number was the family responsible for commanding the legendary Paladins, named for the god of honor, Paladinus. Paladins had to pass not only strenuous tests of physical prowess, but also incredibly trying tests of purity and faith. Only around 500 Paladins were ever active at one time, and all served for life. Perhaps 10 or 20 would make the rank every year during bloom periods. Logan was likely a knight in his father's house, possibly a captain or other higher rank, but he was no paladin. Trem had heard paladins carried an aura about them of incredible power and spoke with an almost otherworldly voice, blessed as they had been by Paladinus in his temple, where they were deemed worthy. This man, Logan, looked the part, but nothing in how he spoke or presented himself marked him a sanctified warrior. Only one High Lord oversaw the paladins. There were others whose duties extended to several additional key components of Angladaic society. Each High Lord kept their own private guard, and at least theoretically were all fighting for a common cause. Especially in times of war and conflict, the people of Angladeus were known to be extremely loyal and focused. No questions were raised by any soldier in the army about rank and house, especially the lower class men who were relatively free of concern in those areas. In the past, the Angladaics had fought beside the orcs to cleanse the Dust Plains and protect the people there. Perhaps Logan and Grimtooth signaled a reinstatement of that ancient alliance. What confused Trem, given what he knew of the Angladaic armies and their abilities, was why they hadn't responded to the invasion of the Napoleon Empire. Though the Angladaics usually chose to assist those they deemed defenseless, a great invasion of the lands just outside their own should have garnered a response of some kind. It seemed every corner of Lagotia knew what had befallen the north, and surely the Angladaics were aware as well. The half-elf determined to learn what he could of the fabled nation's role in the conflict, especially given the opportunity that had just presented itself in the inn's newest guests. Trem watched the two foreigners walk to the back table in front of the young wizard and his cat. The large feline was wary at first, but a reassuring murmur from its master quickly calmed it. The knight took his seat, settling back heavily as though exhausted. The orc dropped his belts and weapons on the bench and casually walked up to the bar, leaning in between Joven and Trem. Joven appeared to be waiting for the large creature to attack, but he merely nodded to both of them and hailed the bartender who had returned to her duties. 2 ales and some food, marm, if you please. The rather nervous woman nodded quickly in agreement and hustled off to fill the order. Trem watched the orc return to his bench and glanced at Joven. Winking, he stood and walked to the odd pair's table. The two had been exchanging a few brief words when the half-elf came over. Logan studied him quickly and immediately decided he should be on his guard. The scuffed scabbard at the man's side and his worn bow suggested a well-seasoned fighter, not to mention his guarded appearance and careful stride. Here's one, the knight thought, who gives nothing away unless he has to. Grimtooth turned to examine him as well, and Logan watched him make the same short assessment and quickly tense in case there was trouble. Behind him followed another youth, perhaps 5 or 6 years younger than Logan. He too looked well-trained, but far less relaxed. The first half-elf stopped between the two and bowed respectfully low to each in turn. Logan returned the welcome with a slight nod. "May we join you, Sir Knight?" asked the half-elf neutrally. "Of course, and you can call me Logan. This is Grimtooth, my blood brother." Logan waited for any sign of disbelief or doubt in his relationship with the orc, but the newcomer betrayed nothing more than a smile of thanks for the invitation. The speaker sat next to him, while his companion warily eyed the limited bench space next to Grimtooth. The orc grunted. "Come on, lad. A dinner bite, boys." Logan stifled a laugh as the youth went red with shame and anger, but he took his seat and settled in, trying hard to look unconcerned. The man beside Logan spoke again. "My name is Trem Waterhound, and this is Jovaneleth of the Blade. We're roaming in search of a friend who may have gone north. You both appear well-traveled and hail from Angladeus. I was wondering if perhaps you'd seen an older man from Bladeholm in your kingdom." Logan shook his head. "We could not tell you. We've been away from our home for nearly 4 years, fighting bandit uprisings in the God's Bones and Dragonscale Mountains. We attempted to return through the thickest woods of Silverleaf a week ago, but found the broken forces to be too great a presence in the region. We never even got to the edge of the woods." The barkeeper bustled up with food and drinks for Logan and Grimtooth, asking the others if they would need any more, but Trem waved her off. Logan took a swallow of ale and stirred his thin soup, adding as an afterthought, "Indeed, all passage east seems blocked, and to the north as well. We may have difficulty returning home at all." Trem pressed him a bit more. "What of the situation in Angladeus? Why have they not responded to the invasion?" Again, Logan shook his head. "Something is preventing my people from reacting. I know that if they could have mobilized, they would have by now. Grimtooth and I are the only ones outside the kingdom at the moment, that we know of anyhow." The orc nodded his stalwart agreement. "I know what's keeping your people back." The entire table turned to see the young boy who had been performing earlier, leaning over the back of his own bench to speak with them. His protective cat was sitting in its chair still, but looked ready to act at a moment's notice. She had shed the bells and other costume attire for an armored kilt of segmented leather with metal studs, along with a single strap to hold her sword and assortment of daggers. Grimtooth cleared his throat. "And how would ye know that, boy?" The youth frowned and answered, "The name's Diaga, and Neep and I can travel where we want, unseen, if it's necessary." He refocused his attention on Logan. "A fortress has been constructed in the very rock of the Pillars of Light that framed the entrance to your kingdom, and with the broken holding the eastern side of the wood, no messengers can get through. The fortress is rumored to have appeared in a day. It's a sheer black wall with no gate that can be seen by the naked eye, or so the men passing by there told me." Logan looked troubled and skeptical. How could they raise a fortress in only a day? It's impossible. It'd take months. Diaga lowered his voice slightly. "There are some forms of magic, great ones, which might make such a thing possible." This statement was met by complete silence by the others seated around the tables. What Diaga suggested was dire news indeed. Most mages were contained within the wizard fortress of Osmandius, or otherwise careful to remain inconspicuous. The arcane wars long ago had devastated the reputations of those practitioners of the gods' language. Too active a wizard might draw the attention of groups who hunted their kind, and outside Osmandius there was no protection from their brutal interpretation of justice. Yet, if Diaga was right, a mage of some immense power was trying to seal the Angladaics within their own kingdom. Logan and Grimtooth exchanged a look. "If this is true, we shall have to force our way north. There might be a way to break in if it's done just by the two of us. Your news is most dire, Diaga, but most valuable as well. Thank you for it." The young mage inclined his head. "I only wish I could have been for the better. I suggest you find more aid before trying to go north. It's crawling with those Nerathian invaders and the Broken, and they don't seem to be fighting each other." Trem sighed and leaned back. Nothing is simple anymore. The world grows more dangerous every moment. Nothing could have summarized what occurred next more accurately. The door of the inn was suddenly thrown open and 5 black forms strode in, taking a staggered formation in the center of the room, blocking the exit. The leader, standing at the head of his troop, appeared to survey the room. Trem could not be sure what he or it was looking at. The face was completely hooded in black cloth, and only a drawn and pale chin was partially visible jutting from within. Shadows upon shadows seemed to mark his face, if there were one. Trem was not even sure it was a man or a woman, but he recognized trouble immediately. The patrons cowered at the sight of the dark figure, sinking back into chairs, frozen in fear. Not a sound was heard, even as the minstrel had gone silent. The leader finally spoke, a hiss of steam escaping from a crack in the rock. "We seek the traitor. Tell us where he is, and you will live. Refuse, and you will die." No one answered. Nobody appeared to know who the dark shape was looking for. Trem, fearing the worst, was about to move behind the bar when he caught sight of a figure coming slowly down the inn stairs. Trem's gaze also took in the jerking, stuttered turn of the hooded heads as the intruders as they turned to face him. They moved in a way that was unnatural and disrupted somehow, as though their bodies could not fully follow the laws of motion that gives a soothing fluidity to living creatures. Ghost strode to within 5 feet of the cloaked forms, and there he stopped. Hands on his hips, cape thrown back to reveal his sword, he faced them grimly without fear. The leader took a step forward, hand moving to his sword. "Time to die, traitor." Ghost let the figure draw its weapon, watching the other four mirror the motion, and then with a blinding speed he drew his own blade and struck. The black figure parried the blow with a swift twist of its shrouded arm and swung quickly into a counterattack that Ghost barely managed to avoid. The wrenching, broken movements of the figures in black became more pronounced as they drew weapons and closed in on the embattled northerner. Javanaleth was on his feet and had drawn his own sword before Trem could stop him. Jovan looked at Trem with a fierce intensity. "We have to help him." Without waiting for an answer, he leapt forward, swinging at the nearest figure. The creature parried his blow, shifted a foot to his left, and struck back. But Jovan was agile, dodging aside from the swinging blade of dark steel. Trem was already next to him, fighting another one of the black-cloaked apparitions, hoping his body still retained its once masterful skill with the sword. Logan and Grimtooth were suddenly there as well, sword and axe working on the other two figures. But no matter what speed the rescuers fought with, the cloaked forms countered just as quickly. Trem could see Ghost starting to tire as he tried to keep up with the lead shade's rapid attacks. He was now completely on the defensive. Suddenly a streak of bright orange appeared between Ghost and his assailant. Neep, Diaga's cat, had jumped into the fray to help Ghost, who was rejuvenated by the sudden appearance of aid. As the two redoubled their efforts on Ghost's foe, the black creature left an opening. Ghost struck, slicing the thing's arm from its body, and a piercing cry roared across the sounds of clashing metal. The limb, corpse-white, claw-like, and scarred with swirling patterns, fell to the floor and dissolved, just as Ghost's blade began to melt in his hand. He threw it away and stumbled back as the thing came at him, but Neep was in its way again, barely holding it off. Trem nearly lost his own arm as he watched the thing's missing limb slowly extend, remade out of the torn cloak, a black, shadowy substance he could not name, reforming into the deathly pale appendage. Trem understood immediately that their weaponry would be of little use against the abominations in the inn. Before he could warn the others, he heard Diaga's voice rising in a chant off to his left, and, in the same moment, saw that Javanaleth was losing his battle with his opponent, stumbling to one knee. Before Trem could intervene, a streak of blue flame lanced into the back of the black form looming over Javanaleth, and the beast screamed, louder and more terribly than its leader had. In seconds, it and its cloak were reduced to a pile of ashes, and the three forms battling Trem, Logan, and Grimtooth turned in an attempt to confront this new danger. Trem was the only one between Diaga and the black monsters, coming for him, and in an instant he knew what he had to do. Before he could change his mind, he held his ancient sword before him in both hands and closed his eyes, focusing on the blade, and whispered, "Eldath Duhakin." The sword flared suddenly as previously hidden runes now shone like molten fire across the steel. A thin sheet of red flame encompassed the blade, and Trem swung it threateningly in front of him, watching as the black-clad figures retreated a short distance. The leader stopped its brutal assault on Neep, who nearly fell backward from exhaustion, as it turned from the feline warrior to fix its black gaze on the sword, burning in Trem's hand. "Elvak," it cried, as though it were a curse, and with a howl of rage, fled through the inn door, followed by its dark company. Logan and Grimtooth pursued the figures outside, but the other fighters came forward to stare at Trem's glowing sword in amazement. Javanaleth in particular seemed stunned by what had happened. Neep had recovered and was now protectively leaning on Diaga, who reassured his companion with soft words and a gentle stroking of the cat's ears. Trem swiftly released his focus on the sword's enchantment when he saw the others staring, and the fire and runes vanished. Ghost came forward, now weaponless, breathing hard. "You've got more than a few tricks up your sleeve. I do not doubt it." He leaned on the counter. The inn had emptied as soon as the fighting began, and the dark figures had made no attempt to stop the fleeing patrons. Ghost kicked at the ashes of the one shade Diaga had killed, speaking softly to himself. "Never thought they'd find me here. At least not so soon. Wolfbane's arm has grown long." Trem sheathed his sword and faced the older man. "You had better tell us what's going on, and quickly. I want to know what the devil those things were, and now." Ghost met his gaze with a quick, oily grin. "Afraid we haven't got the time, half-elf. They'll be back before too long, and I won't be waiting to greet them. We have to leave, and now. You'd best come with me. They'll be hunting you, too, for interfering with their little mission." Jovan looked at Trem, his unvoiced question coming through clearly in the briefest glance. Then he turned to Ghost and said, "We can't do that. I have to find my father, and we need to go north." Ghost whirled on him, suddenly angry. "You don't get it, do you, boy? Those things are from the north. They were made there, and they'll be hunting from there. If you go north, you might as well count yourself dead right now. Trim grabbed the man by the collar and spun him so they were face to face. And what is it you propose we do then? Follow you, surely, but to where? Ghost glared at him, but made no attempt to remove his hand. We go south, like I said. The item I seek will aid us against those creatures, but we must leave now and first go east. We can't risk taking the main road. There's another way, older, south by the town of Delmore. Diaga's head came up sharply. What road is it you intend to take? There are dark paths beyond Delmore, deep in the Silverleaf woods. Ghost shook his head and crossed his arms defiantly. That there may be, but there are darker places elsewhere. Believe me, I've seen them. This is an ancient road, one that can take us south without fear of being attacked. Diaga stared at Ghost piercingly and said sternly, All ways I know of in that region should be left alone. You're not coming anyway, Trem said decisively. Those things are following Ghost and I. Joanna left too, I suppose. There's no need to get involved. I just reduced one of those things to ash. Diaga's voice was deathly calm. It would be fair to say I am involved, and I'm sick of parlor tricks and drunks. It's time to put what I've learned to some use. I will be helpful, you can be sure. Ghost smiled and clapped a none too pleased Diaga on the shoulder. Undoubtedly. After all, you are the one who knew how to kill those things. It's settled. You're coming if that's what you want. Innkeeper, I'll be needing 6 horses. 4, Trem interrupted. The Angledaics surely have their own. 3 then, added Diaga. Neep does not need a mount. Ghost waited a moment to see if there were further interruptions and then grated, And I can pay you extra if I can have the beasts now. The large woman's frightened face rose from behind the bar, but upon seeing the monsters were gone, she toddled over swiftly and nodded nervously in agreement with Ghost's request. My husband owns the inn and handles such transactions, she continued swiftly, when Ghost's brow furrowed in irritation. But I'm certain I can do this for you. But it will take some time to saddle the beasts. Forget that. We'll do it ourselves. Just bring us some food for a few days, and that'll be all. He tossed a bag that jingled with coins at the woman. The frightened matron snatched it and hurried off to prepare the supplies. At that point, Logan and Grimtooth returned, breathing hard. They stopped when they reached the others. We couldn't catch them. They rode off with some black steeds, looked to be rightly ill ones, too. Logan sighed and slumped into a chair. We didn't have time to mount up and ride after them. I doubt we could have caught them anyway. They flew out of the west gate like they had wings. He paused a moment before adding, They killed 2 guards at the north gate, just boys. Seems they broke the slide bar from the outside. How they managed that, I don't have the slightest idea. Trem faced the two. We're leaving with Ghost to head east, and from there we need to ride south. He has a package he intends to retrieve. Logan looked at them all questioningly. You intend to go to Southron? Well, we may as well come too. I've got questions that need answering, and they all seem to involve at least one of you. Regardless, we can't go home. South's as good a direction to wander as any. Joven broke in quickly. It'll only be for a short while. Then we need to head north and find my father. Perhaps we could help your people as well. Very well. Logan heaved himself up from his chair. We'll go south, and then we'll see what we can do to the north. All right with you, Grimtooth. The orc merely nodded his consent to the decision. Ghost cleared his throat and said, This is more than I dared hope for, but if you're all willing to follow, then we best get going. We can't afford to lose any time. The travelers packed quickly, bringing only their bare essentials for the journey and the new provisions provided by the innkeeper's wife, who, despite her considerable gain in coin, seemed happy to see them off. They rode out of the east gate a few hours before dawn, Ghost in the lead on his own large black horse. Trem and Joven followed on smaller, light-stepping brown geldings from the inn, with Diaga and Neep after them, the cat padding softly and swiftly on foot. She was remarkable, moving with an eerie grace, and as they went eastward, she would wander away from the road and reappear beside Diaga as if from nowhere. The mage seemed unfazed, but Grimtooth was fascinated by how stealthy and simultaneously fiercely loyal to Diaga the feline was. Though Neep would not ride, Diaga said the cat could keep pace with them at any speed the horses chose, and all evidence supported his claims. As a rear guard, Grimtooth and Logan rode atop their war horses they had come to Gylo on. Grimtooth's steed, Thunder, was probably the largest horse Trem had ever seen. As Trem looked back over the strange company, he could not help wondering if things would have gone this way if he and Joven had stayed out of the fight. Had not been their conflict anyway, and now these fearsome hunters were after them because of it. Somehow he suspected this would have happened anyway, whether he'd helped Ghost or simply stood by. His focus turned to the man they had all rescued. He suspected Ghost had as many secrets as himself, and if that were true, he should not be trusted. Something was very wrong about him. Trem felt it as he would a cold breeze. Nothing but trouble could come from this march south. His focus shifted to Jovan Aleth, riding beside him. Trem stopped thinking about betrayals and hardship, and instead thought about the young man he'd sworn to help. Whatever happened, no matter what, he would find Joven's father and rescue him if it had to be done. Trem had given his word. So that's chapter 6, and 7 will pick up with Raymir and her story, and we'll probably get through 8 looks like by Friday, which will bring us roughly a third of the way through the book at this point. So I don't see anybody in chat, and I didn't expect it because I myself was caught watching the Penny Arcade channel for a while. So I imagine a lot of people that listen are on there. I'm going to go try to get the updated versions of all the videos onto YouTube right now so you can get them. And yeah, check out @Legacy Chronicle on Twitter. Follow the channel if you can, and check back in on Wednesday for chapter 7. Did I say that? I don't know. The next chapter. Thanks.